Welcome everyone in this new video tutorial about the multiplayer combat editor. In this video we're going to learn how to use the armor and damage bonus built-in feature, built-in MCE feature. So what is this? It's basically how you can modify and mitigate the damage being dealt and received based on several factors you can use. So for instance, uh, if you have an armor system, whenever you take damage, you reduce the damage by 1%. So how can we do this, and how can we use damage types? Actually, no, damage types are going to be for another video. In this video, we're going to focus on damage mitigation. So if we go to our manager folder and open up our My Combat Manager, we can click on the click on the override function, drag and drop the menu to enable typing in, type in override. Actually, we're going to right click, type in feature override, and we actually want to find, we have several functions we can override related to damage mitigation. So apply damage type effect is going to be for the other video. What's interesting to us is mitigate damage apply and mitigate damage received. So we are going to override these and calculate, and we are going to override these as well. These are the function managing the total damage calculation, and this is just to add your own customized calculation to the whole process. But maybe you want to modify the whole process. It's going to be clearer once we override them. So let's do this. Let's click on the override function and type in calculate. We want to override this and the other one as well. And we also want to type in mitigate damage received and mitigate damage apply. And we want to go in all of these functions and connect the pin that it left unpinned, just so it works properly. Everything still works properly even if we don't add any logic to it. So right now we just said that our combat manager is calling the basic MCE logic to deal damage and to mitigate the damage. So for now it's just saying this. The orange node is basically, you have in all of the function, is basically what MCE does. It's saying when we calculate total damage applied, it's calling the parent logic. And if you double click on the orange logic, it's going to get you in the MCE built-in logic in the function. And you can see that this function is responsible for calculating the total amount of damage to deal. So it's taking into account the bonus coming from the damage type you deal, in case you specified some. It's getting the global combat modifier, which are built-in features covered in another video. It's taking into account mitigates the damage applied, which is one of the function we override in our combat manager. Right now, if we double click on mitigate damage applied, it is just saying that it does nothing. So if you add your own logic to mitigate damage received and applied, it's going to pile up on the rest of the logic I was talking about, global combat modifier and generic damage bonus, depending on the types of damage dealt. So these are the logic to apply damage, but we have something a little bit different when we receive damage. It also gets the types of damage mitigation. It also looks for gameplay tags it also looks for a certain type of damage and mitigate the damage based on this. It also gets the global combat modifier. It also gets the base feature I created for you to implement mitigate damage receive, which also does nothing by default, but which you can modify to add your own logic to pile up on the rest of MCE based logic. And we have something new, which is get generic damage reduction mitigation, which is basically on a simple armor system, which says when you take damage of a certain type, you check for the stat manager, you check if the actor which takes damage has a stat manager, and if it has a stat manager, it checks for a stat named damage taken, and it reduces the amount of damage or increase the amount of damage to take depending on this stat. So I talked about an armor system, but it's more of a vulnerable stats. What do I mean by that? It's more something you're going to use if you want to flat out increment the amount of damage a target takes, regardless of all other systems you have in the game. So for instance, if I'm taking Heroes of the Storm as an example, it previously had a vulnerable state which was increasing the amount of damage a target should take by 25%. This is basically the same system than this one. So these two functions, calculate total damage applied and calculate total damage received, are piling up quite a lot of different calculations all together. And if you don't want some of the logic that's here, you can get rid of it by copying everything and passing it to your own combat manager and removing some of the parts which you don't want. And if you want to add, so this is how these two functions work, the total damage calculation. And if you want to add your own, you can also do it here, simply by piling up new functions which modulate the amount of damage to deal. But you can also directly go to mitigate damage received and applied, which are called by default by the total damage calculation, but are returning 0 and 0 by default. By default, that's what these functions do. So in there, you can do your own logic. So I'm not sure if we have... I'm going to try to get an armor stats. Did I create an armor stat? No, I did not. I'm going to add the armor stats to our game. New armor. like this. I'm going to hit save all. It's going to save everything in the project because a lot of things are using the stat enum. I'm going to right click our node, refresh node. I'm going to ask for armor. So for instance, when you receive damage, you can say, hey, how much armor do I have? And how much damage do I receive, for instance. Maybe I do not care about the amount of damage, but maybe I do care about the amount, the tags, the gameplay tags. So I'm going to tell my armor what is the gameplay tags used in the damage I received. So for instance, did I receive fire damage or stuff like that? So it's going to ask for fire armor. So maybe I should have called that not armor, but maybe resistance. It's looking better to call that resistance, but we do not care for now. So when I say this, it's telling me how much armor I have of that type. And if I return, for instance, if I return these values, it's going to say, hey, whatever amount of damage you have, I'm going to increase that amount by 20, and I'm going to increment that amount by 50%. And if you specify minus 0.50, it's going to reduce the amount of damage by 50%, obviously. So maybe you want to say that you have, maybe you want a curve. We're going to create a curve real quick. Just create a new folder, utilities, miscellaneous, create curve float, like this, armor curve. You want to shift click to add new points. You want to say, hey, when you have 0 armor. And we are also going to specify maybe an amount in negative, maybe minus 10. And you can go up to 100, let's say. Let's fit horizontal and vertical. So how much armor, how much damage reduction do you get when you have 100 armor? Let's say 50%. Let's say 50%. When you have 0 armor, you do not modify the amount of damage you take. And when you have minus 10 armor, you take 25% more damage. Minus, yep. What is the, why is my values, okay, so it's not fitting properly. Yep, that was my problem. So when I have 0 armor, I do not modify the amount of damage I deal. When I have minus 10 armor, I receive 25% more damage. And when I have 100 armor, I reduce damage by 50%. So I can add a new variable to my combat manager, call that armor curve. This is going to be a curve float. I'm going to hit compile, select our armor curve, drag and drop that, say get float value. And I want to say that what is my current armor value in time, and I want to return the value. I want to multiply the value by -1. I could have just built my armor curve in such a way that it returns negative value if I want to reduce the damage, but I did not. It was easier for me to understand that when I see 0.5, I'm reducing the damage by 50%. But this function needs to, if I'm returning a positive number here, it's going to increase the amount of damage I take. So I need to negates this number like this. So if we just do this, when we take damage, it's going to try to find our armor stat and reduce the amount of damage we have based on our armor stat. We are going to say that this value is 10. If we have 10 armor, we reduce damage by 50%, and if we have -10, we take 25 more damage, like this. And we are also going to say that our character has an armor stat. So if we go to our init stat function, we can add a new stat like this. The new stat is going to be armor, and we're going to set it to say that the minimum amount of armor we can have is -10. We're going to call that resistance. And this is going to be, the base value is going to be 10, just to see that we reduce the amount of damage. If we hit play, it's going to take a while to play because we added a new stat. So if we switch team and if we deal damage to the other guy, it's not going to reduce the amount of damage it takes. We are going to print here just to see if this is properly called. Okay, I know why this is not properly called. And this is because my third-person character has not this combat manager, as not the combat manager we created. So I'm going to find all the references to that. We're going to do a little trick. I need to replace that component by my combat manager. I have a default combat manager here, and I want my customized combat manager. But unfortunately, I called my combat manager everywhere, and I want to replace that, and that's a little bit inconvenient. So I want to show you a little trick you can use. It's not going to replace it everywhere, but at least it's going to make it so the next time, if we happen to need to replace it sometime, it will be easier that time. So right click that, collapse to function, call that get combat manager, make that a pure function, call the output return value like this, hit refresh all nodes, F5 for me. You can customize this in edit, editor preferences and shortcut. Once you have your function created, get combat manager, you can copy that and go everywhere where the combat manager is called and replace that by the function by holding control and dragging the wire from the combat manager to your return value pin of your function, and get rid of this everywhere except in the function get combat manager. So you can just right click on your combat manager and find references, and it's going to show you everywhere it is used, and quickly get rid of everywhere it is used like this, by making good use of your blueprint shortcuts, because they are few, but when they work, we better learn how to use them. And even there in the interface call, even there in the find team, on the death event, on the take damage event. Now we can control F5 I mean, to refresh all nodes. I'm closing all other tabs. Now we can go to our get combat manager function, get rid of the combat manager, hit compile, save, delete our combat manager, add a new one, which is my combat manager. Then we can drag and drop it and connect that to our return value. And it's going to be used everywhere except in these two events. They are still there and they do not throw errors, but they are not going to work. In the place where we were initializing our combat manager, we still have these, and we can delete them, and we need to re-implement them by right-clicking our combat manager and adding on ready and on initialization, cutting them, pasting them, and when we initialize, we set our team, and when we are ready, we are adding our team color material. Then we can hit refresh all nodes. We can hit play. And now our armor system is kicking in. So you could see before we had our own combat manager, it was taking 6 or 9 damage. So I'm just going to open up our skill, slice. I'm going to check how much damage it's dealing. Where am I specifying? There I'm specifying the amount of damage, simple applied damage. And I'm going to check real quick. I think we are adding a base modifier to our character. I'm just going to get rid of that. Like this. I'm also going to get rid of the little logic I created to add a trigger modifier in another video. I'm going to hit compile, hit save, and I'm not sure. So I'm dealing 3 damage now, and my skill has 6 damage. So I'm going to specify that my skill has 10 damage. How much am I dealing? 8. So this means I have 20% damage reduction. Whereas I was expecting to have 50% damage reduction. Yep. So this is 50%. So this is what I was expecting. And if we say we start up with, I don't know, -5 armor, we are going to take more than 10 damage. And if we have 0 armor, we are going to take... So, okay, I know what's going on there. So sometimes my skill is actually dealing a critical damage, so I can just... Yep, that's... So if I open up my skill, type in, go in class default, type in critical, I have the base critical multiplier and the base critical chance. I can specify I don't have any critical chance. Hit compile, hit save, hit play. And then I'm dealing 10 damage because I have 0 armor. And this is how you can mitigate the amount of... This is how you can create your own armor system, by mitigating the amount of damage you receive and you apply. And you can do a lot of stuff, retrieving the stat manager, getting stats and acting on this. And in another video, we're going to see how you can do this also by depending on the gameplay tags of the damage, not modifying the amount of damage, but applying specific gameplay effects. But that's for another video. So hope you guys liked that one, and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.